right, welcome everybody to this final event at our conference, the Roundtable on the Climate Crisis in the Alpine Regions. My name is Hayek. I'm here at the Department of Political Science at the University of Innsbruck. We are hosting this Roundtable because, as you all realized within the last few days, we are in the middle of the mountains here, which is a beautiful scenery, but there's also a lot of challenges, particularly when it comes to climate change. And therefore, we would like to discuss from a multidisciplinary perspective what climate change does to the Alps, how we can fight it, and what, in the end, what politics and political science could possibly contribute to that. I would like to briefly introduce our podium. We have had a literally last-minute change of speakers, but I'm really very glad that Professor Helga Kromp-Kolb managed to step in virtually. Professor Kromp-Kolb is a professor emeritus at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, and one of the most pronounced voices on climate change in Austria. So really, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
With me on the podium, we have Karin Oberauer. She's from the Department of Geography here in Innsbruck, and she's involved in educational projects concerned with climate change. Then we have Mike Peters. He's the director of the Department of Strategic Management, Marketing and Tourism, and he will bring the tourism perspective into the discussion. And then we have Elisabeth Gsottbauer. She is from the Department of Public Finance, and she does research on the effectiveness and efficiency of policies related to natural resource management and biodiversity protection. I would like, for the first round of questions, I would like to ask all of the participants, all of the panelists, to provide a perspective from their respective research field. In a second round, we will discuss how their research fields relate to politics, what we can do there. And in a third round, I would like to open the floor already and see, as this is a political science conference, what political science can contribute to the climate change debate. I would like to start with Helga Kromp-Kolb. What would you say, what are the most important dimensions of climate change in Alpine regions? Which dimension is the most visible and the least visible in terms of media coverage, public perception, or also how policy and politics deal with the issue?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think maybe not all people are aware in the room that temperature rise in the Alpine region is among the highest in Europe, because mountainous regions in general warm more rapidly than the flat land, and there's no ocean or sea to temperate the rise in the Alpine region. In addition, the effects of temperature rise are significant. Snow cover is lost regarding the duration and also the mass. Glaciers are on a rapid retreat. Mudslides and rockfall are increasing. And many forests are also close to the limit of their adaptability. Media and the public concentrate on snow for skiing, and they do that in a rather ambivalent manner. On the one hand, they acknowledge the fact that the loss of snow cover is a problem. On the other hand, they try not to dissuade tourists from coming. And so they fall in with the practice of advertisement showing powder snow and well, an ideal world for tourism. So this is rather ambivalent. The issue of safety is much less present. Climate change induces threats that affect settlements as well as the tourist trails, for instance, in the mountains. Just these last days, newspapers have reported of severe alpine accidents through rockfall. But without, at least as far as I did not control all of them, but as far as I saw, without addressing the fact that this is also part of climate change, that the fact that we have thawing and freezing in regions and in expositions where it didn't occur before, where there was constantly frozen ground or frozen water, that sort of loosens rocks, and this contributes to rockfall accidents. So I think this whole aspect that there's additional dangers, additional threats in the Alpine region is not fully in the presence, in the awareness of people. And one other aspect which concerns the short, but especially the medium term, is that the retreat of glaciers means that water is transferred from the mountains to the flat areas and then finally to the sea. So at present, when the glaciers are in strong retreat, we have more meltwater, but as soon as glacier sizes decrease significantly, then the meltwater becomes less, obviously. And in the middle term, we must expect a decrease in water availability for many streams and rivers that now are fed by glacier melt. So I think there's quite a few additional aspects that are not as present in the public mind, but also in media or in policies. Of course, there's many other aspects that could be named, but these are maybe two that I want to start a discussion with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Following up on that, Elisabeth, I would like to ask you, which are the natural resources in the Alps that are most affected by the climate crisis, and how do we deal with that, or do we not deal with that?
All right, so I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Helga Kromp-Kolb said. Namely, if we look at the natural resources which are affected, and I will then outline a little bit policy dimensions we have available, in fact, to deal with protection of those resources. So on the one hand, as already mentioned, so there will be less water available. There's less snowfall, less rain and precipitation, which will lead at some point to water shortages or water scarcity. So what are the economic consequences of that? So for the Alpine region, the economic consequences of that are, first of all, that we have fewer water available for energy production. In fact, hydropower is the most important energy production stream of Austria and of Tyrol. We already see this year. For instance, if we take energy production by hydropower now by August 2022 and compared to August 2021, we already see that we have produced fewer energy from hydropower, which in fact is a problem, as we know that we have an energy shortage at the moment. A second sector which will be heavily affected by water scarcity will be the agricultural sector. Not only will agriculture is going to need more water, because we know that our summers are going to be drier, but at the same time, there will be less water available. So we have to see how we are going to deal with this with respect to more efficient water usage and so on. So this is one resource I think we should care about, particularly within the Alpine region. Another resource is when we look at plants and animals. Let's talk about it broadly with respect to species richness, or let's call it biodiversity. What we see here, in particular in the Alpine region, is that because it's getting warmer, plants and animals, think about trees or birds or insects, are trying to move upwards. So they're trying to migrate to cooler regions, which in fact has the effect that at the moment, we're in fact gaining biodiversity at higher altitude. But you have to see it in the long term. At some point, these plants and animals have nowhere to go. And the third factor I think we should be concerned with respect to natural resources is the frequency of natural hazards, which lead to a lot of economic damage. Think about particular hazards in the mountain regions, such as avalanches, landslides, floods, storms, as much as forest fires, which will increase in frequency and will basically threaten our ecosystems. So now the second question is, after having outlined more or less what is affected in this particular region. So what can we do about it? So what type of policies can we use in order to protect and conserve nature, and not only protect it, but also adapt to these changed circumstances? And from a policy perspective, we have like 3 types of policies available. So we can use regulation, typical command and control instruments. Think about it as a nature park or protected area, where some type of land is put under protection. A second type of instrument, I'm an economist, so I have to promote it a little bit here, is we can use economic incentives, right, to steer behavior. So we can incentivize consumers as much as producers to behave more environmentally friendly. With respect to natural resources, you can think about taxation of pesticides, subsidies for environmental friendly agricultural practices, and so on. And finally, we have a third pillar, and I think another panelist will be talking about it, namely education. So we can run awareness campaigns, information campaigns, we can educate people with respect to climate change and nature protection. And the last point, let me add, so what do we know from the set of policies we have available? So what do we know, which of these policies in fact work? So what should we use, right? So on the one hand, so there's a clear winner, and it's not economic incentives so far, but the clear winner is regulation. So the most popular and most effective instrument to protect nature or to conserve resources are protected areas. Protected areas are heavily used worldwide, not only in Austria. Within the EU, we have, for instance, the Natura 2000 network. And within Tyrol, for instance, 20% of the surface of Tyrol is under some type of protection, which means regulation of land use. Some type of land use is forbidden, construction is forbidden, etc. Clearly, you see that the nature protection is probably not going to solve all the issues I've mentioned with respect to climate change. But we also have to consider that besides climate change, the biggest threat to natural resources in the Alpine regions are humans. So we are destroying nature by settlements, road networks, ski resources, and so on. So this instrument is still a good instrument to protect nature. And finally, with respect to instruments which can help us to adapt to climate change, let me just briefly line out one sector. So how can, for instance, the agricultural sector adapt to the scarcity of water? Here we can use instruments such as information, so advising farmers in order to use water more efficiently. We can use economic incentives, providing subsidies for better irrigation technologies, and we can also use regulation. So we can forbid some type of water use during certain dry periods, or for certain users such as ski resource or something similar. So basically we have a whole range of policies available for protection of nature as much as for adapting to the changed circumstances at the local level. And I think I will later talk a little bit more about policies at the national level, but for the moment, I think I will hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much. Yeah, moving on to Mike. I mean, all of these shortages that Elisabeth outlined have a direct impact on tourism, particularly on winter tourism, which is still one of our strongest economic branch here in the Alpine regions. So based on all of these impacts of the climate crisis on glaciers, snowfall, average temperatures, etc., what are the expected short-term and long-term effects on winter tourism?
There are so many. So I probably take over this human being approach. You know, we talk about the human beings because I'm from the management marketing area. So we look at how do people respond to climate change or to media that talks about climate change. And we look at, maybe we structure it like looking at the demand side and the supply side. And that is, I think, quite an interesting job because we had several other crises in the past, and we also looked at how do people respond in Corona to the regulations that they cannot travel and so on. And the question is, how do they respond to climate change restrictions? Especially we look together with colleagues like Robert and others here at our faculties. We look at how do, for example, consumers react to, yeah, we heard it, less snow coverage, no guarantee for, you know, good snow in a certain destination. What is the impact on their decision making? So, and we see that they you know, wait, and now they book probably 2, maybe 1 day ahead, and not like we loved that certainly as suppliers when they booked half a year before. They don't do that anymore. So flexibility is very important also from the supplier side, though. On the other hand, you cannot plan the services and the product offers that well. So for the suppliers, that's certainly, especially for the small, we are very much dominated by small and medium-sized business, more small business, family businesses. For them, it's very hard to plan. And especially now with consumers who want very flexible conditions, you know, like they want to get rid of their booked room a day ahead without any costs. So from the consumer side, I think we see a lot of changes. Especially we heard that the safety is a big issue. Also decision-making, booking behavior is a big issue. But also, and I think that's something that we often forget, it's not only the destination itself, it's also the area where we live. So if you have snow if it's hot, let's say in Munich, so people will escape to the mountains. So that's one of these Sommerfrische products that we also offer here in Austria, you know. So cities get quite hot, so people want to go on the mountains in summer, which is and I say that is a positive impact probably of this climate change issues. Probably not everything is about climate change, but that's certainly a fact. And we see that summer tourism is rising, obviously. And the products are getting more substantial now when we compare the whole year. But also during winter, we see that, you know, when it's raining in their hometowns and there is no snow at all, it's not cold enough, that also impacts their decision-making behavior in terms of selecting a certain destination. It's also interesting that they do not trust, consumers do not trust the classical marketing pictures that we often see in newspapers. Published by the destinations, you know, like winter wonderlands. Interestingly, a recent study showed that if you include authentic pictures, like there's very drastically would be the white stripe in the green nature or brown nature. There is a certain clientele of customers, especially younger ones, who appreciate this honesty. That's quite interesting, and we see that authenticity or these things play a very much important role for decision making for them. So they do trust more social media. We know that from studies. They do not trust the destination marketing agency that's helped. But climate change has an impact, obviously, on that trustworthiness of marketing material. On the supply side, I think it's quite. We have a discussion of glacier. A cooperation between the Pitztal, Ötztal. We have a big image problem in tourism because many consumers think or assign climate change is also impacted or is kind of a result of tourism, using planes, cars, and so on, CO2 emissions, which is certainly true. And this also contributes to relatively bad image of tourism. And you see, especially when it comes to transport, that the young generation, even my kids, they tell me, no, Dad, we don't take the car this time. We don't take a plane. I want to take the train. Oh. And, you know, we do that. So the young generation is very much pushing towards these more sustainable transport options. And from the supply side also, we see that there is a slow movement. We recently discussed that in an interview. Slow movement. It's like you mentioned that, like the frog on the who's, you know, the water is getting hotter and hotter, but slowly. Climate change is not such a dramatic, visible crisis at the which happens in 1 or 2 months, like we saw that in Corona, and people react immediately, and the reactions are very slow. But we see, at least also triggered by Corona, that now people really work together, which is very important in this more structured supply industry. And that they do not only develop, I refer to the Tiroler Weg, which is a strategy paper with nice 10, 12, we will become the most sustainable destination. We are the most family-friendly destination, things like that. These papers are becoming much more concrete because they develop now monitoring or the demand for more data. So that we can really say, okay, destination A is doing something in terms of mitigation of climate change, or is sustainable. But we need data and figures, and I think here we see a change on the supply side, also in terms of fundings from governments and also from the Land Tirol.
Thank you very much. Karin, you work on sustainability education, if I may say so. Is climate change denial still an issue? Is that still a relevant phenomenon in your encounters? And what can you do, or what do you do to overcome it?
Generally speaking, I need to say that nowadays, in the field of climate change education, the focus of education is not anymore to convince people that climate change actually exists. So rather we try to support the learners who already understand climate change is existing, and we want to support them, and they know the urgency of this topic. So I want to tell you a little story. We do teachers educations programs, so program for teachers who want to take part in our programs in the following years with the kids. And last year, it was the first time for me to organize such an event. And it was really exciting, cool topic, cool site. We were in Oberauer, and we wanted to go to the glacier with them. And it was really enthusiastic. And then we went there on our way to Oberauer, and my colleague told me, okay, don't be too sad if there are some people, some teachers who just ignore the fact that climate change exists, and they will discuss with us. And guess what? Didn't happen. So something must have happened during the last few years that it's not, so climate change denial is not the topic anymore. So people know that it exists. Of course, we have to bear in mind that maybe these people aren't that loud anymore. Or of course, we hear people saying, okay, climate change has always been there, but it's not that loud and active anymore. Yes, another group of people we work with are students, school students from secondary schools all over Austria and Bavaria. And well, our work is a little bit different than the classical school lessons. So one highlight of our program, Kids 21, is we take the students to Alpine regions, maybe to Oberauer. We make them encounter scientific experts of various fields, like, for example, tourism, vegetation, environmental ethics, or, for example, glaciology. And we make students really do research on their own with the scientific experts. So they really have the opportunity to experience change happening in Alpine regions. And they see change with their own eyes. I want to give an example. So in Oberauer, for example, we go to the glacier, to the Geissbergferne since the year 2012. And there we make them, or we try to help them to spot the areas where the glacier ended in the year, or around the year 1850, of course. As well as, well, this has been about 10 years, and students mark the end of the glacier each year. And students who went there this year had to go much farther than their predecessors. So you can imagine this is really, really impressive, and they can't deny this. So they can see it with their own eyes and experience change happening. this is enough.
Thank you all very much for these insights into your research areas. Even if you already know most of these things, it's still impressive to hear it all in at the same time. I would like to move on to the political sphere now and do the same round again, asking you from your area of research and based on all the problems and challenges that you've outlined, what would be your most urgent appeals to politics at the regional, national, international level to mitigate the climate crisis? I mean, obviously, some of you have already touched upon it in your first statements, but please take the chance to elaborate and be a little more concrete, maybe. Helga Kromp-Kolb, please.
Thank you. Well, I think essentially there's, I'd say about 4 areas of action that need to be taken. I think the first and foremost is obviously doing everything to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have about 10 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions worldwide by about, well, the political aim is about 50%, but in reality, following science, the European and the other industrialized nations really need to reduce by 80% within the next 10 years. So that is quite a task. And if we don't speed up significantly and become more ambitious, this is something which will be lost. And this means that it is no longer a question of what measure is easiest to take now or is most politically appropriate. The question is, how can I make the necessary measures acceptable or make people understand why we need them? So it's a different type of thinking. I have to reduce by 50 to 80%. How can I achieve this and not what's easy to do? And I think we're far from this switch in thinking. So I think that's the first issue. And that goes for all levels. It also means that for every single decision you take, you have to consider, is this a decision that will enhance climate change or do something against climate change? There's very few decisions which have no impact. Most decisions have an impact in the one direction or the other direction. And if I have to take a decision which is counterproductive, then I think I should have very, very good reasons and already a plan of how to compensate for this decision that goes against the main goals. So that's the first task. The second task is, and for the second, third, and fourth, I wouldn't really put priorities. But of course, we also have to adapt to climate change. I mean, there's always a mitigation and adaptation. They go hand in hand. And we have to adapt because even with minus 80% in this decade, we still are in for more temperature rise. So we have to adapt to the changes that are occurring. And that means we have to give municipalities, companies, individuals, guidance and advice on how to adapt to make sure that it's not a maladaptation that at the same time enhances climate change. Skiing tourism is one of those areas where we really have to be careful about that because creating artificial snow is not something which goes without energy, and the energy that is used for those purposes generally is fossil energy. So that's one aspect and an important aspect. The third aspect, and I think we should not lose sight of that, is to fund generously the Green Climate Fund, which is set up in order to make it possible for developing nations to also adapt to climate change and also mitigate their emissions. Because there's no doubt that the future of our climate will not be decided by the emissions that occur in Europe or America. It will be decided by the emissions that are caused in the developing nations as well as countries in transition such as China, India, Brazil. So we must make sure that we've got all these countries on board. And since we as industrial nations are responsible for most of the climate change that has already happened, and at the same time we're the richest, it's quite clear that it is our responsibility and ethical responsibility to help the other nations in their fight against climate change. So that's the third issue. And the fourth issue is one which has been mentioned frequently now, that's education. Education, awareness raising, and so on. I think our whole schooling system, our university systems are still geared to a world that is that develops incrementally. But what we will now be facing is a world that develops by all sorts of disruptions. And this takes a different type of approach, a different type of handling the challenges. And since we have no real solution, there's no one path towards a sustainable world that everybody has agreed on and that we will now take. So we're still in a phase of trial and error, because the problem is so complex that even with best science, you cannot calculate the optimal pathway. Because it has very much to do with preferences, with cultural differences, and so on. So we're in a trial and error mode that needs monitoring, but especially it needs people who understand, young people and also decision makers who understand the difficulty of the problem and who understand the urgency of the problem, and who have at hand a toolbox of possibilities of how to handle these problems. And of course, one of the tools that is absolutely necessary to be in that box is to involve the population. We need this policy in this issue, but this issue touches on every other issue, to be participatory. There is no chance of solving the climate crisis with just top-down regulations in democratic countries. So that is the fourth and I think a very important part: education, awareness building. And education is not just school children and university students, it's also the general public, and it's also politicians. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisabeth, what would be your most urgent demands to politics?
All right, so my most urgent demand, I have to kind of make a long argument here, but and talk a little bit about what was Helga talking at the beginning. So we also want to mitigate the climate crisis, and for that we need to reduce emissions. So that seems to be obvious. Again, let's take a policy perspective. So what policies can we implement to do so, right? So taking the case of Austria, so we now have very ambitious climate goals. We want to be climate neutral by 2040, even more ambitious what the European Union wants, because they only want to do so by 2050. So you wonder how we get there, right? So at the moment we have like a budget, we have like production-based emissions of 60 million. So we should reduce them close to zero by 2040. Let's look at the main culprit of emissions and see what policies we could use. So the main culprit of emissions we produce is the transport sector. Transport, in fact, produces 1/3 of the 60 million tons of carbon emissions. So that's pretty heavy. The second sector would be emissions for heating of homes and buildings. But stay with transport, because if we can solve transport, we have already solved a bunch of our emissions. Now, if we look at past emissions of transport in Austria, unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic that we're going to reach this goal by 2040. Why? In the last 5 years, we haven't changed our transport emissions at all. We have, in fact, increased them. So we had like always around 22, 23, 24 million tons of emissions in the transport sector. There was just 1 year where we decreased emissions from the transport sector, and that was during the COVID crisis. And this is a common pattern. If you look at the history of emissions, the only years when Austria, as much as many other countries, have reduced emissions is during crisis. We can see this during COVID, we can see this during the financial crisis, we can go further back, fall of the Soviet Union, energy crisis in the 80s. So that's pretty bad, because we do have policies in place, right? So if you look at the transport sector in Austria, we have road pricing, we have tolls, we have subsidies for electric cars, we have differentiated vehicle taxes to make more pollutive cars more expensive, and so on. So you wonder, so we do have policies in place, so why don't they work? And there's an obvious answer to that, because at the same time, while we have climate-friendly policies already in place, we have a lot and tons of very harmful policies in place. So let's refer to them as climate harmful subsidies. And we have really a lot of them. What are climate harmful subsidies? Those are subsidies incentivizing the transport with fossil fuel. So for instance, think about tax breaks for diesel, think about there are no taxes on kerosene in Austria, think about commuter allowance, that is we subsidize people going to work by car heavily. And in those subsidies, Austria spends approximately 3 billion euros. So to benchmark this number, let's look at the climate friendly policies we have. We spend on them 500 million, so 500 million. So if I have one urgent call to policymakers, I would say, instead of keeping implementing quite good policies, you should abolish very harmful policies. So I think that would be a good starting point.
Thank you very much. Mike, what would you like to add to this from a tourism research perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Again, more from the tourism side. I think, first of all, as I said, monitoring. The tourism or government should fund approaches or support the measurement of sustainability in all its many facets. Because as you said, like CO2 emissions, nobody out there in the destinations, they hardly can compare them. They hardly can see how much more sustainable have I become during the last year. And I think we need something to govern them and to support that, kind of also maybe kind of a competition between these now 34 tourism destinations in Tyrol. I'm talking about Tyrol now, but I think that's quite important on the regional level. Secondly, on the regional level, also exit strategies. It's indirectly linked to climate change, but certainly we heard snow coverage is decreasing. We see that some valleys have really substantial problems in keeping up their hotels and the bed and breakfast, but they hardly can exit the market. It's very, very costly to exit the market for some families. If you do not exit the market, okay, then another option is succession strategy. So maybe in the family you find somebody who wants to take over, or it's an external one who takes that over. But I think, and we see that also pushed again through Corona, that many hotels and maybe accommodation service and other services will die in the next years. We see also that hotels become bigger, so they have more beds, are a little bit more efficient. So there should be, this is going to tax policies and issues like that. And I think here the government could do something. And also on the regional level, I think that what we need is support for the development of new products and services. This is about, for example, mobility solutions, as we heard. So support mobility solutions are also very slow. I think we need to have radical solutions. So like destinations where no cars are allowed. So we need to really compete also in sustainability and to say, okay, I'm the most, Laura said that recently, I'm the most sustainable destination here in Tyrol, and that makes me so unique. I'm not the best in terms of quality always, I'm not the best in terms of lowest prices or whatever. It's about sustainability, and that's important. And I think here the government could also fund or support that, because especially mobility solutions are very expensive. Learning, education is the fourth area, I think, which is both on international but also regional, national level important. I still feel that kids is a good approach, but I still think the climate change issues, or let's say sustainability, a broader title, needs to be on the agenda in every high school and needs to be there for, I mean, I see it with my kids, this is quite, scarce what they hear about sustainability or climate change. They certainly read the headlines, but they hardly understand the complexity of the phenomenon. I think here we can do much more. Best practices, learn from best practices. That's an old but still quite popular approach. So those who do the best, they should be torn in front of the curtain. And on the international level, maybe the last sentence, I think I'm always a little bit frustrated to see, I mean, I think we all are, you know, when we see that, you know, 4 or 5 year election periods and some presidents, some governors are on a good way, and then the next one is coming and then they're destroying everything. So I think that a huge problem, and this is not management, it's more political, is the issue of these short-term orientation. And I sometimes miss politicians who do not just take decisions because they want to be elected. They take the decisions because they see a long-term, a positive development, a long-term development, and they don't care about the next 4 or 5 years. And if they do not get elected, at least they brought it on its way.
Thank you. Karin, education has already been mentioned twice. What would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you for your great introduction. The bridge, yes. We also think that political agreements alone, like 15, for example, are not enough. So what is needed is a social transformation. And you probably all know the SDGs. I brought something to you. I will talk about that later. And it is often stated that SDG 4, so quality education, is the key to all other SDGs. So now what is high quality education? And I brought a quote, I won't read it to you, from the UNESCO, which is about education for sustainable development. Well, and it includes not only knowledge alone, so knowing about climate change and the facts about climate change, it's also about specific skills learners need to acquire. It's about values people need to come up with. It's about empowerment of the learners, giving them the chance to really be active in a social transformation, giving them a voice in political meetings, for example. It's also about lifelong learning. It's not only about the young people, it's also about us, about adults, about all the people who need to learn and acquire certain skills and competencies. And for me, especially important is also the social, emotional, and behavioral dimension of learning. So it's also about something called collaborative competency. So how to work together with other people and how to talk to other people in order to reach certain goals. Exactly. And this is also our approach to education. So we want to equip learners with all these skills. We want to give them the opportunity to be climate friendly and sustainable decision makers and actors. Therefore, our settings are inter and transdisciplinary. As I said before, we try to bring them into contact with scientific experts. We work moderate constructivist. That means pupils, students can choose freely their own topics they are interested in, and they are which come from their own life worlds and where they can do something. So now this is a huge field, and I already warned you. I hope Helga is proud of me. I brought the option report, which is a publication written by many scholars. About 19 institutions, research institutions worked together to write options for each SDG and how they can be reached in Austria. And this was written for political actors, and it was handed over to the government in March. And guess what? SDG 4 is about quality education. And here we go. I had the honor to write an option myself. So this chapter alone has about 19 different options, reaching from, the importance of arts within education, or teachers' education, or introducing, as you said before, education for sustainable development in all curricula, not only in schools. Or how to, the importance of transdisciplinary education. My topic, in fact, was mindfulness for sustainability. which basically is about how ESD can help learners as well as teachers to mindfully encounter all the problems of climate change, for example, within their everyday lives. So each of the options has a set of measures, really concrete measures. And I just want briefly to describe the 4 options I wrote, and it is about raising awareness for mindfulness as well as education for sustainability, for sustainable development, sorry, within schools and out of schools. Then the freedom as well as the obligation for schools to individually develop settings, including mindfulness and social emotional learning. Schools and teachers and students, of course, need the time within school to practice mindfulness within schools and also deal with the subject education for sustainable development within schools, which also means that they need money and they need appropriate networks and cooperating with other schools or actors within and without of school. So in order to close the circle, what I do think are the most important appeals for political actors in the field of climate change education is the awareness of all the players involved, creating suitable systems allowing people or schools to carry out appropriate settings themselves that are suitable for themselves, including the time and the money to do so, and being part, so political actors should be part of the whole process. So they could be, for example, players, they could participate in such settings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so now we've heard a lot from the life sciences, from the perspective of climate research, from economics, tourism research, education, but we are in a room full of political scientists, and to try to create a bit of a interaction or debate between the podium and the audience, I would like to ask you, but also all of you, what can political science contribute to this debate? What's maybe something that you would expect or wish from political scientists? Can we maybe be the ones to help bridge the gap between other science disciplines and political actors? What are possible contributions of our discipline to the climate change topic? Yes, please, Helga, you can.
Thank you. Maybe I can put a few questions that I would love to have answered, maybe from the auditorium or whoever feels in a position to answer them. And one is the one which I'm confronted with all the time, and I don't really have an answer. We know that we have about those 10 years time to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50 or even better, 80%. And that exceeding these 1.5 degrees that we've agreed on internationally, that may result in the loss of our civilization. Now, that's not a certainty, but the risk is too high to really enter it. So have politicians not understood how serious and urgent this matter is? Or are they unwilling to act for fear of losing votes? Or are they incapable of action due to pressure by special interests? This is something a question which accompanies me for a long period of time. I don't know whether we can answer for all politicians, but maybe there's some research on that I'm not aware of that helps us to understand why it is so difficult to get moving in the climate issue while we did everything in the corona issue, we're doing everything in the energy crisis now. Politicians are really active, and in the climate issue, there's just delay. I have 2 more questions, but maybe I have more time for them afterwards.
Thank you. Would any of you like to add questions to political scientists?
less than a question, is more when I look at political science. I think political science and economists do share a lot of interest when it comes to climate policy. So for instance, at this conference, there was a great session on carbon taxes or carbon pricing. And where there was a lot of evidence presented by you guys on what are effective climate policies and how effective carbon pricing is. And I think on this question on how we can foster, what also Helga said, how can we foster public support for effective policies? I think political science can contribute a lot. And I would hope that in fact will also help, in particular also economists, to find ways how to convince politicians, the public, be it with participatory processes, be it with expert knowledge. So what are the avenues in order to foster such public support? So this is one area I would expect political science to contribute a lot more in the future. And the second one, just a very brief note is, because I've been talking a lot about evidence and how effective policies are, but I think where we know very little is how politicians, and you are experts in politicians, how politicians use evidence, right? So there's this evidence-based revolutions, and we have a lot of RCTs and experiments telling us what interventions work, what policies work, but there seems to be this gap between policymakers and politicians, maybe not willing to take up evidence, maybe not understanding evidence. And there was also a session at this conference on the science policy interface, and I would hope that political scientists, as much as also this is shared with economists, would work more on the demand for evidence and what explains politicians using the evidence we have, because the evidence is very clear, I believe.
Thank you. I would just like to give Mike and Karin the opportunity to add, and then we'll open the floor, please.
Yeah, there are, I mean, in terms of governance, I think here political sciences could contribute a lot. We have different destination governance systems in various countries, and it certainly very much influences how fast decisions are taken, you know. And I think we have, for example, here in Tyrol, we have a governor who is also the tourism boss, kind of more or less. He's finally the tourism governor. He is then acting with about 34 destinations, and these destinations have also a certain governance structure. And I'm a bit concerned whether this is still that popular, and maybe you know, political science could look into that, because I think that I like, certainly the democratic processes are important, but I do not really think that behind the scenes all these processes are very democratic. And on the other hand, they're very slow. And I think in these times, as we see how urgent it is, we need somehow to install maybe other processes. And the other thing that goes into that direction is, what happened to all those politicians? I think it would be, maybe there is a study out there who spoke about non-convenient things, you know, and did they all disappear, or are there some best practices of politicians who are still there and had success?
I also try to formulate a good questions. It's quite difficult for me because I'm not informed enough what political scientists really, what's their work, really is their work. But from a geographical point of view, we try to, I spoke about transdisciplinarity and including many different perspectives. And I would like to know what are appropriate places where we could, for example, include collaboration between politics and the work with students, so that they come together and well, give students a voice, and where this would be appropriate, for example.
Thank you very much. I would now like to open the floor. Thomas, please.
Thank you. I can't answer for political science, obviously, but I'll try and give you a few ideas. I think political science has been aware of the topic, and there have been established chairs in environmental policy at least since the 1970s. And a lot of these scholars have always dealt with relevant areas and have always looked at ways to create institutions and instruments to reduce emissions levels, etc. On a theoretical level, We go back to Russell Harden and Tragedy of the Commons Problems. That article was published in 1968. Elinor Ostrom is somebody who's built very strongly on that throughout the 1980s. Eventually, she was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics for this work. There have been activist political scientists, so this is not new to political science. However, I think you have picked up, I think, the key point. If we are talking about democracies, liberal democracies, we want our politicians to be responsible and responsive to voters. So they have to forge electoral coalitions that are sufficiently sustainable to impose severe distributional consequences on the population. And of course, they have become more and more severe. That is a very difficult thing. So a lot of work in political science and also in international relations has gone into the creation of institutions that depoliticize decisions of this type, commons type decisions, create expert bodies, empower technocrats. That is not what you had in mind, but this is one of the key lessons I think that we've learned from international relations, for example, where bodies have been set up to consisting of experts who then create norms that then that then will be applied as soft law, for example, within the European Union, basically. So there, however, what you've also mentioned, this is very, very slow. It is not a cognitive problem. It's not a problem of advice. I don't know about many countries, but in Germany, the Umweltbundesamt is a massive bureaucratic apparatus with a lot of expertise, and the Minister of the Environment, whatever the party, is very, very close to that agency, and the Ministry of the Environment always loses in any kind of battle against, for example, the Minister of Economics, even if the Minister of Economics is green and has to abandon ambitious climate goals for emergency measures at the moment. So that's not his preference. So it's not a cognitive problem. It's not even a, but the electoral incentive is powerful, and of course our dilemma is we want it to be powerful in a democracy. So that's all I can say.
Thank you very much. The floor is open. Oh, Helga, would you like to respond to this?
Yeah, may I just an add-on question. If it is the electorate, why is there not a huge campaign explaining to the electorate what it's about? I mean, if we're afraid of the electorate, really the electorate, and not some special interests, then it is a matter of information, a matter of awareness building. And politicians have the possibility and the opportunity to make such campaigns. Why are they not being done?
My name is Sabine Saug. I'm a member of the executive committee of ECPR. So therefore, I try to give two answers which go in the same direction of Thomas's, of course. I think the debate is absolutely, it's super interesting for me as a political scientist working on public policy, for example, because you present different instruments that can be or cannot be used. So now, to answer the question, what can political science do to help us, one, understand, and second, to act? I would say this is a question that situates itself on different levels. The first one is, of course, what can it do to understand? Political science, as Thomas has already said, is a field where we have different subdisciplines, and one of the subdisciplines is, of course, comparative politics. And I do believe that here political scientists have a huge role to play not forcible as activists, but as analytical scholars who compare different solutions and to compare why they worked, why they didn't, what the system was in which these solutions worked, what the structure was, what the institutions were, and so on and so forth. So I think this comparative aspect of political science, which is to a certain extent the key to our working, is a very important one. And the second, and I stop here, I've talked too much, is of course political science associations, not as activist political science associations fostering and pushing for particular solutions, but to give political scientists a space where they can have subgroups, for example, and in which they allow political scientists to make their research known and to create this interaction between decision makers and political scientists. Whether it works or not, this is another question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further comments or also general questions to the podium are very welcome. If you are a virtual participant, I don't know how many we have, you can put questions in the chat and then I will read your question. There's a question here in the front and one back there.
So I think just one comment. I think conceptually, especially as political scientists, it's very important to really differentiate between policy for climate change mitigation and policy for climate change adaptation. And it really muddles the conversation, and they are so different, well, from the level of which the decision needs to be taken, what is the audience, and where's their impact. And I feel like also here, so tourism, it's clearly one of the areas where really adaptation is such an important topic. And I think from a theoretical perspective also should be a much easier policy to implement, to be pursued and to implement. But I think if we mix up these policies, it makes the political conversation also much more difficult.
Thank you. Here in the back, yes.
My name is Bénédicte Laumont, so I'm a fairly young scholar settled in France at the moment. And I'm honestly a bit surprised by the talk that we are having and that we had as well at the reception, because I have the feeling now that many of you, colleagues from other disciplines, have the feeling that political science has not engaged with those questions. And I'm very surprised, maybe because that's maybe because of my background. I'm not working on these issues at all, but as a fairly young scholar, I see how every year how many professorships are dedicated to those issues, be it in France, in Germany as well. So in political science, obviously, be it in political theory, public policies, political parties, less maybe. And as a consequence, I guess, I mean, I think we all have many colleagues who are very much engaged and committed to those questions, be it academically, I agree with Sabine, but also on a personal level. And I think we have many colleagues in political science who try to build bridges between what they might do in their research institutes, what they might publish, and who try to spread their work also in the political arena, especially, for instance, for those who work, I don't know, on political parties and so on. And also to build bridges with NGOs and activists, actually. So that's why I'm a bit surprised by the context of the discussion today. And second point, maybe for the questions that have been answered, at least in, well, French-speaking and I would say German-speaking academia, questions like, how is it that despite the emergency, many of the Europeans still don't vote for parties who are ambitious regarding the protection of environment? And political science has brought clear answers to that question. Another question would be, how is it or how come that we have implemented some ambitious democratic tools, like in France we had that Convention Climat, where citizens were picked quite randomly and invited to debate and to formulate proposals regarding protection of the environment, and how come the government, the French government, did not follow those proposals. So political science has worked on those questions, so that's why I'm a bit puzzled by the whole debate here. But and so I think that our discipline has tried to commit to these issues, but obviously there's some kind of problem apparently when it comes to the spreading of that knowledge. I'm not sure. That's a question, my question for you.
Thank you. Helga, you put a comment in the chat, but I think you can just say it out loud.
Okay, it was just to one of the prior contributions. I don't think separating mitigation from adaptation policy by principle is a good idea, because in fact they interact and there are synergies that you can make use of. And for a long time we have thought of them as separate, and it turns out that this leads to maladaptations, and it also leads to loss of some of the synergies. So I think, I mean, I realize that there's different levels and different addressees. Nevertheless, I think both must be thought together whenever you address one of them. But maybe I could, if I'm already speaking, I might add something to the last comment. I think that's very likely that we just don't get the information that that political scientists have already found, that the results they have found. But then I think it would be really very urgent to somehow connect the scientific groups, so so we don't put our efforts into attempts to make governments act in a method that is maybe not appropriate according to the results of political scientists. So I think this information should really be transferred.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Burcu Mangatlı. I'm a lecturer and researcher at University of Göttingen, and I can maybe contribute from the political science teaching side of it. I'm an international relations scholar, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but I teach a first-year course on global issues. And since the name indicates, a big part of it is about climate change and environmental protection. As part of that section of the course, we are doing a simulation in which students are taking up the roles of developing or developed states, and they try to achieve some agreement to bring the emission levels to the desired level. And first of all, they see how difficult it is, because even though we know that it is catastrophic for our civilization, there are also that target is far in the future, and from a human psychological point of view, election issues or other political issues are much in the near future comparatively. And they also see that these negotiations can take up very long time. And at the end, they end up with this, they come to an agreement, but usually they cannot achieve the target. And they come up with this really helpless, hopeless feeling, very pessimistic. And I think that's part of the problem. This climate change debate usually, I think, make people very hopeless, very pessimistic. They distance themselves from it. My very small sample shows that all of the students are engaged in some way with activism, or they want to be active, but at the same time, we need some hope. The message of catastrophe does not really make people act. The message of hope does. So that's one contribution from me from the teaching side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. One attempt of an answer to the question of Helga Kromp-Kolb about why isn't there a massive campaign? Well, nobody believes campaigns, especially if they impose costs. But the serious answer is there is actually quite a sophisticated body of scholarship on what has been called policy agendas or issue attention cycles, and studying the forces that shape public opinion, the salience, public awareness of such issues. It's quite complicated. Politicians play a role. Interest groups play an important role. The way interest groups frame this, you will know that Shell, of course, is one of the leaders of climate protection in the world. So it's of course there is a battle going on sort of in the public sphere how to frame certain issues. So that type of research that probably Sabine Sauruger knows more about than I do, tells us how complex and how complicated it is to influence public opinion, especially if it's if the costs are, if the benefits are unclear. There was a comment on pessimism, and the costs are very clear. So that's perhaps an attempt to answer. There is research on how issues get to the top of the agenda and how they stay there. But I'm personally not working in this area, but the discipline has dealt with that quite intensively and extensively, not only in relation to climate change, but to all kinds of areas.
Thank you. Karin, you wanted to respond to the teaching comment?
I wanted to respond to the teaching comment, exactly. I totally agree with you. So the painting a picture that is so catastrophic really creates pessimism, and pupils get frustrated. And I think you should not do this. This is not the aim of climate change education, or it should not be. I think your setting is really interesting to do a simulation. What popped up in my mind is, what would be if this wasn't a simulation, if your students got a voice and if they could really participate in political discussions. I think it's important that they understand that it's difficult, but they have a voice and they really can do something. So this would create more positive emotions, for example. So I currently did a study on emotions about learning about climate change and complexity of thinking. And it's totally normal that negative emotions pop up. One major thing we wanted to do more research on is, what about positive emotions? And I think it's really important to be able to imagine positive futures in order to move towards it. And I think participation is a means to do so. So this is what I wanted to make.
Yeah, just commenting that, I think, yeah, there are some approaches we heard that, like, getting young people or other people involved in decision making, participating. We had once one of these forms, like the what if meetings, where we had about 60, 70 tourism managers and sitting in a room, and we were talking about what if there is no more tourism anymore. Or another day was, what if there is no snow anymore? And it was in a valley here nearby Innsbruck, and that was certainly a terrific what if scenario. First of all, everybody was protesting, and well, why should we talk about that? That's and then more at the end of the day, I was very impressed that we found solutions how we can let other industries coming into the valley beside tourism, how we can further develop, but very different products. And I think that's the most important thing with climate change. Climate change does not mean only catastrophe. I mean, it is a big change, and these changes also sometimes have even some positive effects for some, for some stakeholders. But these changes need to be discussed, and I think that's something that's still missing. That we think more in these new generational scenarios, like there is no more snow at a level of 1,200 meters in this valley. That's proven. That comes to the next fact: is it fake fact or not? I still think in tourism it's a very strong community, strong lobbyism. There's still these cases where we have many people who say, no, this is not true. There's no climate change coming. It does not affect us. So we still have this problem to somehow bring our research into the community. Slow, it's getting better. But I think this it does not always have to mean it's only about catastrophes. There is hope.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more? Oh, there's a question in the Q&A thing. The question is, and it's probably quite a good summary of what we have been discussing. Why is there so little interdisciplinary exchange among scientists? That political science really seems not to be known among scientists of other disciplines. Whose job would it be to connect disciplines? Maybe there's a larger lesson to learn here. It's not about a lack of evidence or smart research, but scientists need to understand politics in order to make their results politically relevant. What would you say to that?
Just one final comment. Yeah, I think it's a good point. We have these research centers also here, I guess also at your universities, and in this tourism research center, we have geographers, we have economists, we have informatics guys. We do not have guys from political sciences yet. There's another research center, but I think that since we have that, we are probably 6 professors and many of the students, PhDs working together. Since that, we really can develop interesting interdisciplinary projects for the EU. That makes sense because we as management people, we cannot measure the link between managerial actions and biology, wildlife effects, or whatever, and that's quite cool. Yeah, so I think that's an important comment. Yeah, join us.
Yes, please.
Maybe just to add on that, I work at a actually natural science institute as in a very small social science department. And so we are very much motivated to collaborate, but the hurdles I didn't understand until I actually had to do it are very high because we don't even share a vocabulary when we're talking about the same topic. So we need always a much more time and many more resources to get to a level where we can agree on very basic things. For example, if we want to submit a project, compared to if I were just working with political scientists. I do think one major step in that direction is that all bigger project funding organizations now require, social sciences to be integrated into the natural sciences project. So I think that is actually the main big step that was needed to give us the resources to deal with that.
Thank you. Maybe if there are no more questions of the audience, I would just like to give the panelists a quick chance for like a roundup comment if you would like to. Helga, please.
Well, maybe I can continue with those last comments. I think I fully agree that we need positive visions. And I am quite sure that we will not solve the climate problem if we don't at the same time solve many of the other problems we have in the world. And many of those other problems have a much more direct influence on the well-being of people who have to take action. So I think there's a huge chance and there's huge hope in looking not only at climate, but looking at, for instance, SDGs, but at the whole picture. And of course, if you do that, you need the interdisciplinary work. You can't look at the complexity of the system and just be a natural scientist or even just a climatologist. So I think the real chance for the future is positive visions And positive visions means that we solve a lot of problems, like for instance, the income gap or well, a lot of things, if we solve them at the same time, financial system change in financial and economic system and so on. And that means we really do need to work together on an interdisciplinary level. With the project that Karin showed the option results from, that is one attempt in that direction. But possibly we have too few political scientists in that group. We'll have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisabeth?
Yeah, just as a final note on this collaboration between different sciences, in particular within the social sciences. So my feeling is it's true, we are still different silos, political science and economists, even though we do very, very similar research, as said. I've seen many sessions here. We also see the same sessions at economic conferences, and we can do better in collaborating, pursuing the same research questions. But I see some hope. I mean, we now have also similar journals. We do publish in journals like Climatic Change, Climate Policy, the Nature sub-journals. I think if we start publishing in similar journals and read those similar journals, this will definitely help us, because before also our incentives were very different, right? And so, yeah, personally speaking, I'm very optimistic. So my vision for the future is that there will be more collaboration and that we learn from each other in order to solve the policy problem, the evidence uptake and issues we have been talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe two comments only. I think there is a movement towards measuring the travel industry by number of visitors as usual. That's normal. That's what we always did. Number of nights they stay in a destination. I think we move into the direction of away from the growth orientation, more into kind of quality of life for locals, quality of life for the visitors. And I think that's quite a good movement, because that also links other disciplines coming in, sociology, for example, and psychology and so on. I also think psychology would be very important to integrate more, because we still have this big gap between intention and action. So everybody of you here might say, okay, I don't take a 2-day trip to London next week because I want to be more sustainable. But in fact, sometimes we do that, and we in a group of people would say, no, we never. My intention is to behave better, but we do not behave always better. And I see there's, after Corona now, it's I mean, you can experience that in yourself, what's going on the airports. I think, and that's probably my positive message, think about when you travel, stay a bit longer. That helps us a lot. Stay not only 2 days, stay 3 days. That's very, very sustainable in terms of transport, in terms of costs that need to be put in, make up the beds and the room, whatever. That helps us with human resources management. So please take that with you, and thank you very much for the invitation here.
Also from my side, thank you very much for the invitation. I think this meeting was really inspiring, and hearing all the different perspectives opens up much more thinking about your topics as well. And I think it's the first step to getting to know other scientists and their fields of research. And I think this is really, really important that people collaborate. Although, as you said before, it's a really challenging task to do so, to understand each other. And I think we should go on working in this direction. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much again, Helga Kromp-Kolb, Elisabeth Gsottbauer, Mike Peters, and Karin Oberauer for participating in this panel. Thanks to all of you for this really fruitful discussion. I hope we all go back to our universities and start collaborating interdisciplinary on the climate crisis so that we can help solve it. Yeah, and personally from the local organizing committee, I would like to thank you all for being here. It was a wonderful week. Safe travels back home, and hope to see you all around soon. Thank you very much.